everyone? My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today on this episode of Newsflash. And we start obviously with the latest on the developing situation out of Israel and Gaza, as fear is gripping southern Gaza amid the intensifying Israeli bombardment over there. Also, we take a look at and compare, as over the weekend we kind of continue to see some of the we saw the restarting of the bombing, but we also saw prisoners from both sides giving their testimonies about what it was like to be in captivity, of course, by the other side of this, war, conflict, genocide, whatever you want to call it, it is just a crazy, crazy world, whatever you call it at this point. And some of the stories coming out from both sides may be a bit surprising. Meanwhile, we obviously had to take you back to Washington with calls for a ceasefire growing. Israel military has been apparently launching a closed-door PR blitz on Capitol Hill, and we will reflect on the uniquely, but not uniquely badly corrupt, just uniquely corrupt George Santos as he was out of Congress, or just kicked out of Congress over this past weekend as well. We have an absolutely great show for everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Really do appreciate it. You are listening to Newsflash. Just a few quick notes. We'll try to get another episode of Hell Island. That is our UK show. We're going to have that try and come out on Tuesdays now instead of Fridays. Kind of just taking that, recording off day and, maybe try and fit out another episode of Newsflash on Friday as well. But either way, we still do have some very, very interesting things coming out on both shows, on the Newsflash and the Hell Island part of the equation. And one thing I just want to, quickly hit off, before we miss, is that the passing of Henry Kissinger that came out, the news came out just as, I was kind of kicking myself just as we released our most recent Wednesday show. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of a busy Friday and did not put out, any other episodes, Newsflash or Hell Island, but we're trying to get the Hell Island out Tuesday, another Newsflash out Wednesday, and maybe another Friday Newsflash for you as well. But that is, if it's not out by like 2 or 3, it's not coming out on Fridays. It's just, how things are schedule-wise. But OMG, Henry Kissinger is officially dead. It was really, kind of a long time coming. And I think, the best thing that I can recommend you do is take this opportunity, and hopefully, it inspired you in some way to take a moment and learn about some of the crimes that he's done. And, I can tell you, one of the best ways, at least in my opinion, that you can learn about them is to go to Hidden History, which is, of course, our wonderful history podcast that we just finished. It was the 4th season of this past summer. Really, really great run of just continuous shows. And we talked a lot about it, throughout our entire run. Definitely some of the dirty wars with the Contras. That was some of Henry Kissinger's work, and in Guatemala as well. And if you look at this is another one, episode 5 of our 3rd season. This episode called Nixon's Worst Crime was another really great instance of some of the butchery and barbarity of Henry Kissinger when he and Nixon worked together to stop a Vietnamese peace deal because they wanted to, win the war their way, get the credit for themselves, even though the war could have ended substantially shorter. And of course, then the war continues for much longer. And I think that Nixon's talking about that from that perspective is definitely one of the biggest legacies of Henry Kissinger as well. You could talk about through Pinochet, through Chile and Allende, which I believe we talked about way back. But honestly, I am not sure. If that's definitely, if we haven't talked about that, that's definitely something for a future season. Yeah, but there's so many examples. We got Jacobin is also coming out with a really, kind of complete book. But yeah, from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and then you got all the stuff in Latin America, and just, really just a history of essentially everything involved, really involved with everything from, in some way, the Nixon, even the LBJ, I believe, was the administration where he first got to start, all the way from LBJ up until, advising as recently as, would be probably in some way advising, at least informally, a President Hillary Clinton, which, didn't happen. So there we go. Either way, we're going to start with the normal programming of the show at the moment with the latest from the war on Gaza. Israel has ramped up attacks across the Gaza Strip, including near hospitals and in the south of the besieged enclave, where the ground operation is intensifying there. Israel's indiscriminate bombardment of Palestinian civilians in southern Gaza has reached new depths, according to the Norwegian Refugee Council chief. Again, it really is remarkable how, and I've said this for quite a while now, there's actually really no interrogation, no sort of, questioning or no sort of wondering of the fact that Israel has consistently provided places for, quote unquote, safe places and safe corridors for people to go to. And there have just been, clear reports, clear evidence, and, just beyond disputable fact that Israel has continued to target those same areas, sometimes, just literally talking out of both sides of their mouth, even on the very same day. So it is really, really telling there. Israel's indiscriminate bombardment, really, of southern Gaza here as well, doing really much of the same thing they did to Khan Yunis and Rafah City, as Gaza City, turning them, all three cities into just piles of rubble, all main infrastructure, all main, forces of civil society, just completely gone and wiped out. Again, the Palestinian Red Crescent says it's lost contact with its teams after telecommunication services were cut off in Gaza again amid Israeli bombings. This is the fourth time that this happened, and the death toll now up to at least 15,899 Palestinians. So, meanwhile, there have been arrests made as Israeli forces conduct raids across the occupied West Bank with a whole host of neighboring areas. And now, really interestingly, starting to target the hospitals, starting to target the civil society operations in this just ethnic cleansing based war on Palestinian civil society. All the way through Jenin and the Jenin refugee camp, including the vicinity of Jenin Hospital and the Al-Amal Hospital in Jenin as well. The Askar refugee camp in Nablus, places throughout Ramallah and really Jenin primarily as well. So really scary stuff, and continued targeting of, with armored trucks, bulldozers, and more have been deployed across the occupied West Bank as Israel's forces continues dozens of raids and arresting several people, including Wadi al-Nis, in Wadi al-Nis and south of Bethlehem as well. So, really some pretty clear and incredible stuff. And meanwhile, we have the U.S. State Department announcing their special envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, who will be visiting the region, discussing security in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, which comes after increasing incidents with the Houthis. And they're essentially just sending missiles over onto ships, and some of the commercial ships they're actually hitting, but they're also targeting some U.S. warships, which are obviously not going to be as successful. There's 3 commercial vessels coming under attack in the Red Sea, with the USS Carney shooting down 3 drones fired from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. A Houthi spokesperson said they attacked 2 Israeli ships. The Israeli military denied any connection to these vessels. So it really seems like, they have been able to, it is really just a basic testament of the ineffectiveness of the Saudi, program, that these guys, they're sending their missiles over, relatively untouched, and they, have not been doing that much either. But, meanwhile, these are the same people that caused the Saudis years and years and years of trouble. And also the just ineffectiveness of our support of the Saudis, which led to tons and tons of civilian deaths within Yemen in the first place. So, that was really, proven to be completely ineffective. And also this, little, very, very relatively small thorn in the side of the U.S. and Israel's kind of, military machine is really showing that it is not going away anytime soon. So, this is coming here for him as Iran and Houthi attacks on international shipping threaten almost 2 years of joint progress to end the war in Yemen, according to the department in a statement. On Sunday, 3 commercial vessels came under attack in the Red Sea, with the USS Carney again shooting down the 3 drones from Houthi-controlled areas. The State Department added that Leonard King will also be meeting with representatives from the UN, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman to support this resolution to the Yemen conflict. Meanwhile, there have been reports from colleagues in Al Jazeera Arabic, as well as the Wafa news agency, to Al Jazeera English, of multiple deaths and injuries following an Israeli strike on the Sheikh Radwan area of Gaza City, with the women and children believed to be among the casualties. Again, attacks just continuing, night after night, minute after minute after hour, in really kind of an unprecedented lightning speed fashion, which is really clear and disturbing to see. And yeah, so with that being said, we kind of continue following the situation, but there really just seems to be, no just continued atrocities, and just the bottom line, just broader focus of the war is the continuing focus to the south, and a complete, inability to question in any way the fact that Israel, why Israel has to turn towards the south. What are their goals going to be when they, did to the south what they do to the south, what they did to the north. And what are they going to try and do with these civilians? And that is definitely going to be something that we are going to find out more about in recent weeks. But, already we're seeing parceled out parts of Gaza Strip being put into, hundreds of small districts where, these safe zones in these areas, are being, targeted very, very precisely, almost kind of a converse way, because, in some ways, they'll be targeted very precisely. We're going to go these exact, blocks of this exact very small district here. But, they're then are going to not be precise, and that they're going to be wiping out an entire civilian apartment block, just towers on towers of, just regular people's homes, and with no pretense that there's any sort of Hamas activity within. So that is the kind of paradox of precision that we've been seeing from them. But meanwhile, we're seeing, increasingly, more efforts and presentations, and plans being put forth, just reporting, being reported out, with, even some U.S. Congress members supporting this after a push, and we'll get into this in our next story, to condition aid not to Israel, but U.S. aid not to Israel, but to the Arab states if they refuse to take in, Palestinian refugees fleeing the tyrants in Hamas. That is their words of it as well. So, and we'll take a look at what, the Saudis had to say to that. I believe this was Saudi or some UAE guy. What he had to say to this. Unfortunately, I'm unable to actually find that clip, but it does, you can very clearly see that there are, real efforts by the Saudi, I think it was like a Saudi guy who just came out and said, and there was a bunch of, other Arab leaders around him, just essentially being like, we are of course, us taking refugees will help, lift the weight on the Palestinians, but, we can also lift the weight on the Palestinians by stopping the bombing and the killing of the civilians for, really no apparent reason, and in no way effectively getting at Hamas. So I think that's a very, very fair point to say. But meanwhile, we have seen a lot of, prisoners and some, progress being made in this conflict, as prisoners have been exchanged, as Palestinian teens and women were liberated in a groundbreaking prisoner exchange agreement between Hamas and Israel. There have been chilling accounts emerging of dire conditions in Israeli prisons. Detainees give testimonies on how Israeli prison authorities subjected them to food deprivation, medical negligence, regular beatings, and menacing threats aimed at them and their families. Despite many of the prisoners being released from different prisons across historic Palestine with no way of communicating with one another prior to their release, their accounts have been very consistent. For 7 days, starting on the 24th of November, the prisoners were exchanged between Hamas and Israel as part of a temporary truce, which was extended twice but collapsed on the 1st of December as Israel resumed massacring Palestinians in Gaza just 3 days ago. A total of 240 Palestinian prisoners were released as part of Israel for this deal, including 107 children, 65 teens, 18 and older, and 68 women. The vast majority of Palestinians released had never been charged with the crime, and most had been in Israeli detention for less than 1 year, according to the New York Times. Throughout these 7 days of prisoner exchanges, Israel detained more Palestinians than it released, amid what the UN Human Rights Office in Palestine called a dramatic growth in the number of Palestinians arrested and detained by Israeli security across the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. So here are some of the stories I think it's important to get into. Teenager Mohammed Nazal was released in the fourth batch of exchanges with broken arms and fingers. He said his Israeli jailers provided him with no medical treatment. Nazal is from a town near the northern West Bank city of Jenin called Kabatia. He described how Israeli prison guards entered the cell he shared with other Palestinians for a head count. Prisoners were ordered to place their hands on their heads, and when Israeli jailers didn't get the response they expected, Nazal said they started to beat him on the head, back, and arms. I spent a week suffering, bedridden on the mattress, he explained, adding the fellow prisoners fed him and helped him drink water. Nazal said the Israeli prison authorities provided no medical treatment and did not take him to a clinic. He said they returned days later and beat prisoners again, and leaving some bleeding from their faces again. Just seemingly, not even really for any, major political thing. They were trying to, find out. They weren't trying to, ask him any questions. They weren't even trying to get any information. As stupid as that may be, to try, even just for your own purposes, to try and get, valuable military information extracted from torture. They weren't even trying to do that. It seems based on, really of all these accounts, there was no, and these people, again, not really charged, not really put in for these, very, very serious crimes. They were just in there to be in there. They were in there like, so many other things Israel does. They were in there as a method to spread fear, to the people in the prison and also the families in the prison, because they know what's going on to their loved ones. The families outside the prison, because they know what's going on with their loved ones inside the prison. It's an incredibly fear-based method of, oppressing this population and surveilling this population and making sure that they're always feeling like they're in some way going to surveilled, kept down, watched, whatever. It turned into a battlefield for them against us. Nazal asserted they entered with the intention to kill, wielding metal batons that they bent on us. Nazal described the conditions in the Niqab prison, where he left, as dire. He said that one of his fellow inmates died, after which beatings lessened, but food remained scarce. And he was not staying with other young prisoners, but adult and elderly inmates, just, again, whoever they happened to find, just chucked in there and beat up at will. But funny, apparently Israel's propaganda thought they really, had him. They got him good. Because they really sprung into action as soon as Nazal's testimony gained traction, releasing a video purportedly showing him his release from prison to the International Committee of the Red Cross with two perfectly working arms, according to the main Israel Twitter account. This is scandalous. Is he lying about having his arms injured? This is a credible incredibly scandalous story. And you could hear, this is the video they put out of him, kind of getting released from prison. He's talking in the background. You can see his arms are, hanging limp at his side, and he kind of just gets led through and gets onto the bus. And with all the time, his arms kind of hanging limp at his side, which, again, does certainly not preclude them from being broken. So, which is really a ridiculous thing, is that people from the Red Cross kind of let him get on the bus there. They say CCTV footage shows Mohammed Nazal leaving the prison and boarding the bus with two perfectly working arms. Again, it's like he never really did anything more than have his arms hang limp at his side. And if anything, this shows you the fact that it is true that despite him later showing up with two casts, the fact that he wasn't given the two casts in the first place speaks to his testimony about his time in Israeli prison. Benjamin Netanyahu's Arabic spokesperson Ophir Gettleman posted the video, adding, "Another Palestinian lie is debunked and Pallywood is busted again." He said that Nazal told the media that Israeli prison guards broke his arms, but when he boarded the Red Cross's bus at the prison, they were fine. The video, of course, only depicts Nazal providing information to an Israeli officer and subsequently being handed over to the Red Cross with his arms at his side, not wrapped in bandages. Nothing in the video contradicts Nazal's testimony. Apparently, one prisoner reportedly lost consciousness. One Palestinian prisoner lost consciousness upon his release due to inadequate care and insufficient food. Of course, unlike the Israeli hostages, they were not just immediately speared away to hospitals in Tel Aviv and kept away from the media. They were kind of definitely interviewed, but also kept under close Israeli surveillance, prohibited from celebrating, all that, the rest, and kind of unable to used Israeli medical services to recover from their Israel-imposed injuries. One of the youngest Palestinians to be released from detention, Saif al-Din Darwish, recounted the appalling conditions imposed on the Palestinian boys in Ofra prison in the occupied West Bank. He said they were served dried, uncooked food, such as raw falafel and sausages. He described how newly detained Palestinian boys would arrive at the section with visibly bruised, swollen faces and eyes, suggesting they had been beaten by their Israeli captors. Again, food not good, and it's not something that, with Hamas, it's like, okay, it's not the most surprising thing, frankly, that they did not provide good food to their captors, because, they also, it's not like they were, exactly eating good in themselves. They definitely had the option, Israel did, to provide, good food, quote unquote, or not good food, but just, standard basic food, and, to their captors, which is not something that they were able to, really even, do and prove successfully, that they had no interest in doing. Ahead to Mimi, who became an iconic figure in 2018 when her arrest and 8-month detention, and we talked about this, I believe, in the last show, when she was in prison again in this October 2023 situation, her family was threatened. So that was another great, little element of this whole situation. She essentially said, was essentially told by Israeli captors, according to her testimony, that if she said anything, her father would be killed. They said, quote, "We've got your father in prison, and if you say a word, we will kill your father in prison." So pretty scary stuff there from Tamimi, who is also, for now, free. So pretty important to look at some of those testimonies there. Here's another one, pretty shocking one from this is, I forget his name, okay, Josh Paul, who resigned from the U.S. State Department over arms transfers to Israel. And keep this in mind also, by the way, the next time you hear of allegations and, really disturbing tales and some, secondhand eyewitness testimony from the Israeli side about, the real prevalence and systematic rape by Hamas fighters. Again, not to say that, no rapes happen. I think that's a pretty outlandish statement given the fact that it was a war and, it's kind of, unfortunately, a thing that happens very, very often in war, which obviously does not justify it in a court of law or morally or anything like that. But, with the vagueness and just kind of unsubstantiated alarm with these claims, how they are repeated versus the really harrowing testimony from Josh Paul, who was a former State Department official who resigned over arms transfers to Israel. Keep in mind that when you, those allegations, when you hear, or this allegation, when you hear this, lack of specificity and some of the other allegations that have been made.
You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believed they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. You mentioned...
Yeah, so that is a very strong statement there from the former State Department official Josh Paul. And I think it's worth keeping in mind whenever you hear the label terrorist thrown around by Israelis. And also keep in mind this really... It's succinct and well-put tweet by Mohammed Al-Kurd. The intense resurrection of these rape allegations, when you start to hear about that, it's really meant to distract from the massive massacres the Israeli army is committing in Gaza right now. But the former are unsubstantiated tales, and the latter, and by the way, as we just heard from Paul, which include actual rape allegations that have been completely ignored, are being televised and being admitted to, by people who at least knew about them at the time. In one picture or one statement, I feel like from someone like that, specified statement of really detailed allegations and, one picture of just any of the devastation going on in Gaza right now, I think speaks, a fair bit more to a lot of people than, hectic tweets at the UN or whoever else for, loving the, supposedly loving the rape of Jewish women and girls and really playing on this, barbaric Arab animal stereotype. All right. With that being said, we are turning now to Washington, where high-level Israeli military officers are conducting private briefings for members of the U.S. Congress on Israel's war on Gaza, according to documents reviewed by The Intercept, saying there's an Israel PR blitz happening this week, facilitated by a handful of senators, said a source familiar with the meetings in the upper chamber. Practically all of the briefings on this issue these last few weeks have been members only, meaning congressional staff and the public are not welcome. One briefing exclusive to members of the Senate, scheduled on Monday and organized by Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, involved three senior IDF officers stationed at the Israeli embassy. Senator Duckworth again wanted to write that meeting. So the briefings come as Israel continues to face backlash and increasing kind of Democratic Party, at least, resistance to some of their really just amoralities that we see coming out of Gaza, that we see coming out of Gaza at the moment. Saying Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio who said he had not spoken with the IDF in recent days, told The Intercept, "I know there are going to be some folks from the IDF here tomorrow or the day after to brief members of Congress." Senator Gillibrand told The Intercept, "I had a private conversation with the IDF officials, but I did not attend any briefings," saying she declined to comment on her meetings. So the shifts here really spurred the increased pace of congressional briefings, with the IDF officials kind of referring to the shifts in the narrative, and what we're really seeing is this kind of fear, mostly brought out by embassy officials, that they're kind of losing this narrative, that they're and that is of course why we see, I think as well, this intense resurrection, to put it in Mohammed al-Kurds' words, of these rape allegations. So Cory Booker had an interesting quote on this when asked about it by The Intercept. He said, quote, "My friend, I would not speak about those classified meetings," Booker told The Intercept when asked about the IDF briefings. None of the materials reviewed by The Intercept indicated the briefings were classified. Briefers in the closed-door meetings were said to include several senior Israeli military officials stationed at the embassy, including Major General Tal Kelman, former head of the Strategic Directorate and Iran Division. Just again, a bunch of military guys. Another briefing is scheduled for Tuesday. Pretty much essentially here, we have these guys up in uniform standing in front of people saying, do not forget about the crimes of October 7th. Make sure you're still outraged about them. You're not, properly holding Hamas to account. Get yourself sorted out. Give us some military aid. Come on already. It's like, starting to tap their feet. I feel like this moment when, their needs are not being met, was kind of like the overindulged, spoiled son. So apparently, according to this retired Major General Amos Yadlin, briefed Senator Martin Heinrich, Yadlin, who had also issued a fiery statement on the Hamas attack, saying that Hamas will pay like the Nazis paid in Europe. Heinrich and Yadlin did not immediately respond to requests for comments. Another briefing scheduled for Tuesday and organized by Senators Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut and Marco Rubio of Florida is, of course, a screening of the footage from the Hamas attack. And I think, it is not a coincidence, according to the source here, that these briefings are now happening as public opinion is shifting and there is real pressure to corral lawmakers and the recipients of their campaign contributions. So, really kind of telling and pretty obvious, really, of what's going on here, saying we want to get what we paid for, is what, people like AIPAC and the IDF, who work very closely together, they were saying, we want to get what we paid for. We want to, have our influence respected. And that involves being, a little bit more of a vocal advocate, at least according to these people, than they are being right now in Congress. All right, to our last story in just a second.
My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWRN content better. And thank you so much for listening.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going now to our last story and going to really a wonderful reading series here by Ben Burgess in Jacobin as we celebrate I guess I wouldn't say celebrate, but reflect on the sad loss of George Santos for representative of New York's 3rd Congressional District. Really made me wondering, I think, Burgess really has a good point here talking about, Washington full of dishonest and corrupt politicians. Congressman George Santos, who manages to get himself expelled for his wild shenanigans, just flouted the norms of what polished corruption in D.C. is supposed to look like. And I think that it really gets into the article here. He writes, former Congressman George Santos, a New York Republican, was never a volleyball star. He wasn't a producer of the 2011 musical Spider-Man, Turn Off the Dark. That's also an incredible lie here. His mother didn't die on 9/11. His grandparents didn't flee from the Holocaust. And, of course, he was never Jewish. He was just Jewish. That was probably one of my favorite, Santos quotes out of so many. He never worked on Wall Street, and he was never the employer of several victims, or as it turns out, any victims of the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. This was, to put it mildly, a fairly odd string of lies for a politician to tell about himself. I can understand the ones about 9/11 and the Holocaust, but did he really think his political career would benefit from people thinking he'd been a big deal in the world of college volleyball? And why on earth did he pretend to have been involved in a really notoriously disastrous Broadway flop? The only way I can make sense of it is that Congressman George Santos wanted to, above all, be an important or interesting person with some connection to news events that captured people's attention. If so, he definitely got his wish. And, also probably just a pathological, inveterate liar and scammer. U.S. House of Representatives has had a broad constitutional power to expel its members, but it's only voted to exercise that power 6 times over the centuries. 3 of the congressmen were Confederates who got the boot in 1861 for committing treason, but George Santos became a far more interesting and important person by becoming one of the grand total of 3 who managed to get themselves expelled for personal corruption. The last one of those was Jim Traficant in 2002. So again, let's pause for the pop quiz. He writes, what does it take for, really to be the first man to get kicked out of Congress for corruption in 21 years? If your answer was being the first member of Congress to be obviously and deeply corrupt, you just failed the quiz. I mean, look at, Nancy Pelosi, who has not held any job besides politician in her entire life, but as of 2021, when she was serving as Speaker of the House, she'd somehow accumulated a net worth of $120 million, and also her clear, bait and switch around the, stock banning situation, as she was one of the biggest, stock market trading profiteers. It was just incredible to see. Perhaps you do think Pelosi's stock market success was a coincidence, but how do you explain the 168 former members of Congress currently working as lobbyists? I have a hard time believing that anyone who wouldn't be routinely fooled by the wallet specter in The Simpsons thinks politicians' behavior in office has nothing to do with the hope of receiving exactly such a post-congressional reward. Well, you'd get a better sense of how Santos managed to get himself expelled for corruption when you read the New York Times account of the 23 indictments the former congressman is now facing. And, honestly, you know what? Just drop all those indictments. He's not going to come back. He's not going to try and run again. He's done. Just leave the poor man alone. Anyway, he falsified the records with the FEC. He committed wire fraud. He made up fake donations to qualify for funds from a national GOP committee. He, quote, stole a donor's credit card to transfer more than $11,000 to his own personal bank account and swindled $50,000 from 2 other donors using a fake nonprofit, using the money to, buy designer goods and settle personal debt. As the Times notes, these accusations seem vastly different from the typical corruption cases that ensnare politicians, which often hinge on intricate quid pro quos and complex legal questions about the nature of a political bribe. Santos' crimes have more in common with those of a run-of-the-mill grifter. And honestly, that is exactly why I think he is defensible. It's he's the one person who, at least in some ways, was a hustler and was a pretty successful hustler, never really ripped off a, down and out, innocent person, if you think about it, other than, I think that was the one, veteran that he kited checks for that were supposed to be for his dying dog or something. I don't know. Just, again, somebody who is, definitely an inveterate liar. But when it comes to evil people in the Republican Party, he's probably the least evil person, someone with probably some of the least evil thoughts and just pure blood on their hands. And I think that is why when you take a step back and look at all the other politicians, all the incredible corrupt things that they do, I think it is very, very clear that George Santos, his loss should be, more looked at mournfully than gleefully celebrated, except for the fact that there will likely be a new Democrat in there soon for, what little joy we can take from that. All right, we're going to be back hopefully tomorrow with a new episode of Hell Island. We'll see you then. It's Newsflash.